Hi, welcome to CMMC Automation. On this channel, we share with you tips on how to automate your CMMC compliance efforts using ChatGPT to save your company considerable time and resources. My name is dphillips. I am the president and founder of Aspire Cyber. We specialize in helping small defense contractors prepare for their CMMC assessments. Also, I am a certified CMMC assessor and instructor. Let's get to the content.
In today's video, I'll be showing you how to use ChatGPT to automate the compliance activities for 3.1.3. Control the flow of CUI. This is going to be the first level 2 practice in this series. So let's get to it. For the first two level 1 practices, 3.1.1 and 3.1.2, those are located in the CMMC assessment guide for level 1. Now we've shifted over to the CMMC assessment guide for level 2. So although for the assessment guide it's separated into level 1 and level 2, the level 2 assessment guide does include all 110 level 1 and level 2 practices. With AC.L2-3.1.3 controlling the flow of CUI, that controlled unclassified information, we want to ensure that we have boundaries set up where the flow of that CUI, whenever it's transversing your internal network going to the internet, that it's encrypted. Also, when that CUI is being transmitted internally on your network, you want to have boundaries set up and rules specifying who can send that CUI, who can access it, what systems can it flow to. So you're going to have different devices on your network for those technical controls, such as a proxy, your firewall, switches, routers, setting up that VLAN, potentially that CMMC enclave, where you want to make sure that you're documenting and controlling where that CUI is flowing, both internally and external to your network. For all level 2 practices, this is going to be that CMMC level 2 assessment, which means there's going to be an independent assessor from a CMMC third-party assessment organization that's going to want to see documentation, evidence that you have each level 2 practice fully implemented. And the way they're going to verify that is by looking at the assessment objectives. So if we take a look, just a reminder, this is going to be the actual practice, control the flow of CUI in accordance with approved authorizations. And then for this one, we have a total of 5 assessment objectives. And again, this is what the assessors are going to be looking at. So they want to determine each assessment objective. We're starting in the same conversation from the previous practices that we covered. Before we paste in the practice, I just want to start off again by giving ChatGPT the context of how I want it to respond, letting ChatGPT know what my expectations are in terms of the format of its responses. So starting off by letting ChatGPT know, hey, I'm going to be providing you information from NIST 800-171 practices and assessment objectives. I want you to include specific administrative and technical solutions, and letting ChatGPT know I do not need a response for this prompt. All right, ChatGPT understands. And then the next one, I want to let ChatGPT know I want the estimates to include the time required, complexity, expertise, and cost for the solution. All right, so at this point, we're ready to input the information about the practice for 3.1.3. Control the flow of CUI in accordance with approved authorizations. Important first step, we'll make sure we're labeling that CUI, where it's categorized as controlled unclassified information. We're going to need to have a policy, data classification policy, categorizing the information to different levels of sensitivity. So when we think about the different levels in the context of CMMC, we have the federal contract information and the controlled unclassified information. We're going to need to properly train our employees how to categorize and label that CUI. And In this one, ChatGPT is recommending a data loss prevention solution. So once we categorize the information as CUI and FCI, then our data loss prevention solution can ensure that that data only flows authorized systems. We need to enforce our access control policies. If you recall, in 3.1.1, I showed you how ChatGPT can create a access control policy for you, at least a template, and then from there you'll just customize it to your organization. We have our identity and access management solution. We have role-based controls. So it's controlling what users have access to CUI and what are their authorized functions and transactions, which we covered in 3.1.2. Need to encrypt that CUI. So whenever it's stored at rest and doing transmission, need to ensure we have that FIPS 140-2 validated. It's very important that it's validated. Cryptographic modules. I was going to have a regular auditing and monitoring. We need a SIM solution to just make sure we're consolidating all of the logs and being able to audit and monitor where that CUI is flowing, user activities. This is the initial guidance that ChatGPT is giving us for controlling the flow of CUI. Now we're going to delve into the actual assessment objectives. The first of 5 assessment objectives for 3.1.3 is information flow control policies are defined. Follow the steps, identify the data types and sensitivity levels. So we have the CUI, we'll have personal identifiable information, we have just commercial customer information, employee information. We need to have the different levels of sensitivity for the information within an organization. We're going to have those data handling requirements. What are the approved authorizations? Need to specify the access control mechanisms, such as RBAC, DLP, implement training and awareness, and define the procedures for monitoring and auditing. 3.1.3, it says control the flow of CUI with approved authorizations. So let's get some examples of what are we referring to in regards to approved authorizations. So give examples of approved authorizations. Again, just users being able to process, access, transmit, or share specific types of data. And this is going into more so with the RBAC, so the role-based access control. Hey, if you're in HR, you have access to PII, you're authorized to share that PII. IT administrators can access system configuration, financial. So you can see the importance of having role-based access controls and limiting the access and approved authorizations based on the role that an individual is in. So these are just some examples. For the next assessment objectives, methods and enforcement mechanisms for controlling the flow of CUI are defined. Let's see what ChatGPT can give us for this one. Going back to data classification and labeling, role-based access control. As I mentioned in previous videos, a lot of these controls will overlap, but that just lets you know that once you implement, for example, DLP, that's going to cover a lot of the assessment objectives and practices. So the FIPS validated encryption, network segmentation. This is one that's going to be really important in regards to controlling the flow of CUI, access control lists, virtual local area networks. So enforcing that segmentation. I mentioned how you can set up a CUI enclave where just on that VLAN is where all the CUI is stored, and only people that have access to that VLAN can access the CUI. So segment it logically from the rest of your network, from your corporate network. So to elaborate on VLAN, I'm going to ask ChatGPT, how can I set up a VLAN for CUI? Virtual local area network. So you determine the number of VLANs needed. ID. We're going to configure a capable switch for that VLAN. Configure our devices and endpoints to be part of that CUI VLAN. To configure the access control list or firewall rules to restrict traffic between the CUI VLAN and other VLANs. So you can have a CUI VLAN, for example. You also can have an HR VLAN, a finance, research development. Those are ways you can segment your network logically. We need to monitor and maintain our VLAN. Make sure that it's in compliance with CUI handling. For the next assessment objective, designated sources and destinations, e.g. networks, individual devices for CUI within the system and between interconnected systems are identified. To identify, we need to make sure that we identify the CUI data types. So this is one big challenge that a lot of defense contractors run into. And when I'm working with defense contractors as clients, they really struggle with identifying the CUI and labeling it, because a lot of times when it's coming from their prime or the government, is not labeled. So that is a big struggle for a lot of contractors in the DIB. But we need to be able to identify the data types of CUI. What are the sources? Where is it coming from? So that's how we can do that data flow diagram. Okay, where are we first getting that CUI? Whether that's in the RFP or when the contract starts or that teaming agreement. How are we receiving it? Are we creating it? Then how are we storing it, transmitting it? Determine authorized destinations for CUI within your organization. You need to define approved networks and devices. What are the interconnected systems? So if we're talking about partners, cloud services, third-party vendors, you can't forget about those interconnected systems. Who has access to those CUI systems? Is it your MSP? Is it your cloud service provider? You need to be able to make sure we have that fully fleshed out and illustrated in a data flow diagram, for example, or network diagram. Documenting all of the sources and destinations. We have to implement those access controls, RBAC, then monitor and audit. Next assessment objective, authorizations for controlling the flow of CUI are defined. How do we do that, ChatGPT? Going back to that CUI handling policy. Again, whenever there's a policy, I would probe ChatGPT further. Okay, how do I create this comprehensive policy? Give me a template. Make sure we clearly define the user roles and responsibilities for those that require access to CUI. Remember, if someone doesn't have a lawful purpose for accessing CUI, then they shouldn't have access. Establish those access control rules. If we're using DLP, we need to define those DLP policies. What are the secure channels we're using to transmit and receive that CUI? All right, incident response procedures. You definitely want to be prepared for an incident. And how are you going to respond? How's your incident response team going to kick into action to contain that incident and minimize the impact? Prevent it from becoming a disaster. Always have to train our employees and monitor the flow of CUI. Okay, so for the fifth and last assessment objective for 3.1.3, want to approve authorizations for controlling the flow of CUI are enforced. How are we enforcing? Going back to our RBAC, our attribute-based access control. Define the user roles and responsibilities. DLP is going to be another way to enforce. So a DLP solution can actually block unauthorized transmissions of CUI. Talked about network segmentation, VLANs. We're encrypting that CUI at rest and in transit. Remember, with FIPS 140-2 validated cryptographic modules. performing regular audit checks, make sure we're doing our patching to maintain the security of our infrastructure. Going back to our incident response plan, we need to be able to respond to incidents, quickly identify them, and contain those incidents to make sure that the confidentiality of CUI is protected. All right, so we've gone through all 5. We have gone through the practice for 3.1.3 and then also all 5 assessment objectives. As I continue to emphasize, for each practice, you have to evaluate the assessment objectives to ensure that you are producing the evidence required to show that assessor during that CMMC level 2 assessment that you have fully met the practice. So speaking of evidence, let's ask ChatGPT give us an example of evidence that we'll need to satisfy this practice. Give examples of evidence that my company will need to demonstrate that this practice and all assessment objectives are fully met. We're going to need that CUI handling policy, and that could be part of your access control policy. It needs to be comprehensive and include data classification, labeling, storage, transmission, access control, and disposal. Clearly define those user roles and responsibilities. What are the access control rules? We have data loss prevention policies and configuration. What are our secure communication channels? Are we using VPN, encrypted email, secure file transfer protocols? Next, network segmentation. Do we have a flat network where everyone on the network can access everything, every system, or is it segmented? So we need to be able to show that in our network diagrams and configuration files. What are the encrypted protocols and tools? Are we using FIPS 140-2 validated cryptographic modules, which is required for encrypting CUI in transit and at rest? What logs are we capturing for audit logs? It should include access logs, firewall rules, DLP policies, etc. Incident response plan training. Next, I'm going to ask ChatGPT what network devices can help control the flow of CUI. So our firewalls can assist in terms of acting as a barrier between the organization's internal and external networks. So we can configure it to permit or deny traffic based on predefined rules. Our routers and switches. Remember, a switch can help set up our VLAN. Got our virtual local area networks. Intrusion detection and prevention system can also assist in monitoring the network traffic for signs of malicious activity and can help to control the flow of CUI by detecting and preventing unauthorized access or transmission of sensitive data. Also, the DLP solution can do that as well. Network access control can enforce what devices are accessing our network. Make sure only authorized devices and users have access to the CUI within the network. VPN, we're using remote access, making sure that we're using encrypted channels and only authorized users and devices are connecting. And then that proxy server can serve as a content filter and help restrict the flow of CUI. So these are just some of the network devices that you can use to control the flow of a CUI. Since actually identifying and labeling CUI is such a challenge, let's see if ChatGPT can give us some additional guidance. Give specific examples of CUI and suggestions how to properly identify and label CUI. Remember that CUI is not classified, it's unclassified information. So we know that technical drawings and specifications, blueprints, schematics, anything export controlled, ITAR, suggestions label the documents with CUI-export control. I'll put the link to the NARA and the DODC CUI registry in the notes. But yeah, it's just ways that ChatGPT can give you additional guidance on how to identify CUI and label it, but you certainly want to reference the NARA or the DoD CUI registry for additional guidance. And the DoD offers free CUI training as well that you can take online to get a better understanding of how to identify CUI. If you go to securityawareness.uslearning.gov, find the DoD mandatory controlled unclassified CUI training, where you can go through this training and to give you a better understanding of how to identify and label CUI. And I referenced the NARA CUI registry. So controlled unclassified information, we have the different categories, different markings. I also have training. So there's a lot of resources out there for you, free resources to help you better understand how to identify and categorize the CUI. We have all the different categories: defense, we have the control technical information, export control. So I'll give you additional guidance. Ready to wrap up this practice. I always like to end off by having ChatGPT consolidate all of the guidance that it provided into a chart format. So for this chart, I want ChatGPT to summarize the guidance that it provided today, including administrative controls, the names of specific technical solutions, estimated time to implement, and a dollar range for estimated costs, complexity to implement each control, and priority for implementation. So that's a lot that I'm requesting of ChatGPT. Let's see if it can deliver. It's looking like it's delivering it with no problem. All right, we're talking about data classification and labeling. So there's, according to ChatGPT, there is software for data labeling. So we're going to probe a little further on that one. Role-based access control. So it's a broad range for that one in terms of price. Network segmentation. Data loss prevention. So ChatGPT is not giving me the specific names of solutions, which I'll follow up with a probe on that one. So let's stop that. So following up by probing ChatGPT to list specific names of vendors for the technical solutions. This would be a good resource for you if you have no idea where to start in terms of what solutions are out there. By providing this prompt to ChatGPT and getting the list, really good starting point. So for our identity and access management, Okta Identity Cloud, Microsoft Azure Active Directory, got our different firewalls, Cisco, Juniper, Fortinet, VPN, and this list is not going to be exhaustive, but again, just giving you a starting point. And from there, you can evaluate each product in more detail. Data loss prevention, Symantec, McAfee. We have our FIPS 140-2, Microsoft BitLocker, Sophos. So I'm interested in the data labeling software. So let's find out some more about that. So I'm going to say elaborate more on the data labeling software and give practical examples how I can use it to identify and label CUI. So it helps organizations identify and label sensitive information such as CUI within documents, emails, and other digital assets. It uses artificial intelligence, which we're using right now, or machine learning. And let's see, here are some practical examples. So it can automatically scan the content of documents and emails, searching for patterns or keywords to indicate CUI. You can assist it with classification. Use the metadata and watermarking. So yeah, just another resource tool that's available to you. So this is something that you may want to look into more in terms of data labeling software. But yeah, could be helpful. So this Bold and James classifier, I had never heard of that before. But Titus, I've heard of Titus before. But yeah, something worth looking into if you're really struggling with labeling CUI. I wouldn't solely rely on the software, but it could be a good resource to get you started. The last prompt for this episode, I'm going to ask ChatGPT in chart format, consolidate all the guidance that you provided today into a project plan. As you all know, I'm big on actionable guidance. So ChatGPT is giving you this guidance. We need to put it into a consolidated format. In this case, a project plan, so you all can get started, or you can hire a consultant to assist you, like Aspire Cyber. Shameless plug. We want to data classification. Choose a layman software, implement it, the software, develop access control policies, implement identity and access management, network segmentation, secure communication channels. That's a good project plan to get you started. Again, for CMMC level 2, I don't recommend doing it yourself unless you have that expertise on staff, because there are a lot of nuances, a lot of technical controls that you'll need to implement. So you don't want to just kind of wing this. But if you are in a situation where you have to do it yourself, have to figure it out, then certainly you can see ChatGPT can assist you a lot, help you automate a lot of these processes, get you on the right track. It's not a magic bullet. It's not going to be a autopilot, but it can really point you in the right direction versus the traditional old-fashioned way where you're just trying to Google things, sift through articles, and just sift through the regulations, all of the jargon. It really can break it down for you into actionable steps. All right, so we covered 3.1.3, controlling the flow of CUI. And yeah, ChatGPT gave us a lot of good guidance. Hope that you got a lot of value from this video. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at dphillips@aspirecyber.com. If you have any comments, feedback, certainly I invite you to leave them in the comments down below. I'd love to hear from you. And remember, if you don't have the time, energy, expertise to do this yourself, and again, for CMMC level 2, I don't recommend doing it yourself because it's highly technical and a lot of nuances. Certainly, I invite you to reach out to Aspire Cyber, contact us. We have a team of certified experts like myself. I'm a certified CMMC provisional assessor and instructor. So I'd be happy to guide you along the way, help you navigate and prepare for a CMMC level 2 assessment. So next time I'll be back to cover 3.1.4.
Thanks for watching CMMC Automation. I hope that you got a lot of value from today's video and you use ChatGPT to automate your CMMC efforts. It's going to save your company a lot of time and money. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me at Aspire Cyber. Also, you can leave your questions in the comments down below. Be sure to subscribe because it helps out this channel immensely. I really appreciate it, and good luck to you on your CMMC journey.